Hey, DragonCon YA track. I am so sorry to have to miss the con this year. I miss you guys so much. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And I'm so glad that we're all gathering together to talk about In the Hall with the Knife. I thought I would do a little Q&A. So let's get started. Who was your favorite character to write? Oh, that's an easy one. Scarlet. I loved writing her chapters so much. I would just cackle uproariously while writing them. I would text lines to my friends while I was working. She's just so delightful. She's so wickedly smart. She's so wicked. She's just, she wants to rule the world, but, she would do it for the good of others. Definitely fancies herself the smartest Avenger, as it were, and she can kind of figure out what the situation is and how to make it work for the benefit of herself and for the people that she loves. What drew you to the idea or opportunity to write a novel based on Clue? Well, my agent wrote me about how they were looking for a writer for this series, and I was like, oh, put me in, coach, because I love Clue so much. And I did an audition, and I felt like I nailed it, and sure enough, they hired me. When you're doing licensed work, it's like auditioning for a movie. You write your thing, and then you send it in, and you either hear or you don't. And I really felt like I had this one in the bag. I'll admit that. They gave us a scenario to write, and we just had to write a chapter of it. And the character that I loved that I wrote into the original scenario, I actually kept her and moved her into my book, and that was Orchid. How much input did Hasbro have on the story? Hasbro's been so great to work with. We've been on the same page since the start regarding the brief of bringing this property into the modern YA world. And it really helps that there's no definitive version. Clue's been around for decades, and there's been so many different versions of the games with so many suspects, biographies for the suspects, that there was never any concern that I'd be, wrecking the Clue Bible. So I don't know, which version of the game that you happen to have in your closet, but the biographies are different, all through the years. Like Green has been a reverend, he's been a spoiled stepson, Plum is sometimes a .com millionaire. They trade out Mrs. White for Dr. Orchid about 15 years ago. There are versions of the game that have a Monsieur Brunette in them. So there's all these different versions. And so I was able to go back and take elements from these other versions of the games, even ones that are decades old, and put them into the game, like calling it Tudor House, and characters like Rusty Nailer and Silver and Gold. Like they're all characters from other versions of the game. So it's funny because sometimes I see reviews that are like, oh, she invented the character Orchid. And I'm like, oh, you haven't bought a version of Clue recently, because, Orchid is the one that you get with the game when you buy it now. What other things were translated from the game? For example, did you keep a copy of Clue in front of you as you wrote about the layout of the house? Yeah, actually, until I had the floor plan memorized, I did. It's funny because there are things about the game that don't actually translate to reality, because in real life you usually know whether a murder occurs with a gun, a rope, or a knife, and it's not really a mystery. A lot of the weapons are blunt objects, though, so that I think would be a mystery. And then you also usually know where it happened unless they moved the body. And so when I looked at the layout of the house, I'd see things that shouldn't work if it was a real place and not a piece of cardboard with pictures on it. And then I thought to myself, how do I make this a part of the story? Because obviously most people who read this book are going to be Clue fans. So I want to make that sort of a fun Easter egg, because when you're doing licensed work, like the point is to actually do the fan service. And in book 2, in The Study with the Wrench, this isn't a spoiler, but in book 2, they actually grapple with the fact that the secret passages have to intersect at some point because they cross each other. And then in book 3, in The Ballroom with the Candlestick, there's one more crazy thing about the house that I explore, but I'll say no more. POVs are so tricky. Did you have techniques or strategies for the different voices? I always just try to put myself in the head of the character and to see things through their worldview. And once I really know who those characters are and the kind of words they would use and the kind of things they would notice, that's how I do the POV. One thing is I always love metafiction. And I use a lot of it in my books, from the footnotes in Secret Society Girl, the letters in For Darkness Shows the Stars, the puzzles in Omega City. So I was able to put metafiction in this book too, and I wanted one of the characters' POVs to be seen through the eyes of, through the lens of a journal or a diary or that kind of thing. So I picked Peacock, and in the first book, she's got her sports journal. And it was definitely a challenge trying to get characterization and story across in her workout logs. Beth is probably the most monomaniacal character in the first book, which, given this cast, that says a lot because Oliver's right up there too. But she is so focused on her training that she doesn't even realize there's like a murder investigation going on around her until her ex-boyfriend kind of makes her the central suspect. And then she's like, what? What's going on? How did I miss this? And in the second book, you can see how that whole situation weighed on her and how it changes her. In the second book, she's also viewed through the lens of metafiction, but it is a different thing. It's not a workout log anymore. It's a different thing. And in the third book, it's a third thing. And that was really fun for me to write. Did you write the book sequentially or characters all at once or something else? So this is probably going to get a little in the weeds because it goes into the complexity of plotting a mystery and how it's not really a mountain or a W or whatever other plot structure you've learned, but it's kind of more like a spider's web. So from a character arc perspective, I looked at each POV as a short story about that character and where they were going to get to from the beginning of the story to the ending. And when I was revising, I used this method that Jonathan Mayberry taught me at DragonCon last year, and it's called chases. And I go through and read each character straight through and made sure that I knew their through line as far as their character arc. But I did write the book sequentially, so I'd know where I was in the plot and what clues had been dropped and things like that. And one nice thing about having multiple POVs is that you simultaneously trick and reward the reader. So you trick the reader by cutting away to a different POV whenever a character might do something that would give away what was going on. So one example would be that whole section of the book where Oliver is the one in the house, in Tudor House. You don't get Vaughn's POV. I don't know if any of you guys noticed that. Looking back, you can't have Vaughn's POV because Vaughn is there. So you don't see Vaughn again until after he's beaten up Oliver and taken his place in the afternoon. And so that's like a way that I tricked you. And then you reward the reader. This is a Hitchcock thing. Hitchcock said, very badly paraphrased, that suspense is what happens when you show the audience the bomb under the table and then pan up to where the people are eating unaware. So with multiple POVs, you can be in one character's head and find a clue that they don't understand, but the reader does because the reader knows more about that character. And that makes the reader happy to feel like they know, that they're in the know. So you're in Mustard's POV, for instance, when he's trying to figure out if Plum is a murderer or some other kind of criminal when he's following him into the secret passages, and the reader already knows what he's doing down there. Did any elements of the story change while you were writing it? For example, did you know who the killer was from the very beginning? Well, when you're doing licensed work, it's all in conversation with the company. So I'd outline it one way, and then there'd be suggestions, and we'd find a way to make it work. I think with the first book, originally he was going to be, Mr. Body was going to be hanged. And then we decided against using a rope, because the publisher came up with the title In the Hall with a Knife, which was such an amazing title that I just went back and stabbed Headmaster Body instead. Are you a fan of the board games or the 1985 movie? I love the 1985 movie. I basically have it memorized. We used to go on these road trips when I was a kid, and this was before tablets or anything, but my parents had this conversion van, and it had this like little tiny TV itty bitty thing with like a VCR in it, and we had one of the VCR tapes we had was the Clue movie, and we would just play it to death. And there are like a ton of movie quotes in the books. In all 3 books, I tried to stick as many movie quotes as I could, as possible in there. I actually think that might be why they hired me. And here's where it's safe for me to say this, because this is a Hasbro game too. But there's this mashup version, which you can buy online. I think I got mine at Target. It's a mashup of Guess Who and Clue. And it's predictably called Guess Who Clue, but it's superior. I'll just go ahead and admit that it's a superior game to both Clue and to Guess Who, because it sort of combines all of the best features of both of it, and it concentrates on the fun part of Clue, which is the the sleuthing and the guessing and the narrowing down of suspects, and it kind of cuts out what I think is the less fun part of Clue, which is like rolling the dice and trying to get into those little tiny doors and move around the board. So that's my feeling. So we play a lot of Guess Who Clue in my house, and not so much the original game. What are some of your favorite thrillers or murder mysteries? Did any help inspire this book? For me, it always comes back to who the characters are. So all the mystery properties that I love, it's because I loved who the characters were, whether those were the people involved in the mystery, whether it was the sleuths, that kind of thing. I'm the world's biggest fan of Veronica Mars, except for the 4th season, because nobody has time for that. And again, that's a show where the characters were kind of intricately involved in the murders and in what was going on. So Veronica Mars is a huge inspiration, and also I think the other big inspiration would be The Westing Game, which is one of the pinnacles of Kidlit. It blew my mind when I read it, and I was 30, so it still blew my mind. I have a hard time imagining anything like that being published today, but you can definitely see how it has influenced writers who grew up with it. Jennifer Lynn Barnes talks about it, and for sure the whole idea of these characters and this long history being intricately related to the mystery, and also the sense of place. Sunset Towers is a very particular place, and so is Tudor House, obviously in the Clue books, and I think those 2 things definitely influenced me a lot in planning this series. What was your process like for translating the Clue characters into modern day teens? I wanted to give them a little bit of what we recognize and love about their game piece counterparts. So Mrs. White is the caretaker of the house, Professor Plum is the school's resident genius, and Colonel Mustard came from military school. If you note, I even have Mustard call Plum Professor in jest. And then I wanted to bring them in the 21st century with more diversity, explorations of their sexuality, things like that. Orchid, as I mentioned when I developed her, the Me Too movement was really exploding in Hollywood, and I had a friend who was very involved in all that, and I just wanted to shine a light on some of the things that happened to young women in show business and how they could get chewed up and spit out. What inspired you to have the book take place at a boarding school? That was actually just part of the brief. They wanted the book to take place at a boarding school because I had written books set in college before, the Secret Society Girl series. They thought I could handle that. I don't know anything about a boarding school, really. I actually had to enlist the help of my awesome cousin, who was a teacher at a boarding school in Maine. And so, he gave me a lot of really good advice. And so in his honor, not only did I set the school, make the school kind of like his school in Maine, very science focused and stuff, but I also turned him into Headmaster Body, and then I killed him. Is there anything else interesting to share about your process for writing this book? I struggled so hard with the idea of giving them these color names. Scarlet and Orchid, fine. Girls are named after colors and flowers. But oh man, it was Mustard. Mustard, I didn't want to call him that. We went back and forth on that a few times, and I'm so glad that, that I ended up doing it, and I ended up calling him Mustard, because it turns out that after you write 75,000 words, calling a character Mustard, it just seems very, very natural. I think it's a similar process to Jughead in Riverdale. You just get used to it, and you're like, oh, that's this person's name. So I think after writing this series, I am much more daring with names, because once you start calling a character that, it becomes believable. Like, the name becomes believable. I don't know. Mitt Romney and Babe Ruth exist, and they seem to have done okay for themselves. What do readers have to look forward to if they haven't read In the Study with the Wrench? Kissing. I get reviews of the first book saying that there's no romance in it for a YA novel, and I was like, hey, guys, it's been 24 hours, and there was a murder. Who has time to make out? And then, in book 2, I have several characters making out, and I finally got to write all of those things in it. And also a lot of people die. But seriously, I love second books because you know who the characters are at that point, and you can just dig into them and really twist the knife, so to speak. Except it's a wrench. Twist the wrench. If you could write another book based on a board game, what would it be? Probably before this year, I would have said Pandemic, because I really liked that game. But I'm over it. No, never gonna happen. Let's see. I think the only correct answer here is Settlers of Catan, right? Is there a book series, like a Settlers of Catan tie-in series? And if not, like, Settlers people, call me. Because I think it would be great. I would set it on, like, an alien world, and unpack some of the, like, inherent colonialist vibes of that game and see what happens. I think it'd be great. Yeah, call me, guys. The third book is coming out soon. Do you plan to write any more books in this genre beyond the Clue series? I am so excited for y'all to read In the Ballroom with the Candlestick. It's very wild, and all the threads that have been sort of dropped since the beginning come together explosively. You think you know what's happened, even going back to the first book, but maybe you don't. And there's more kissing, and a lot of people die. And if you like audiobooks, get the audiobooks for these series, because the narrator, Christine Pham, she's amazing. And as for more murder mysteries, I don't know. I'd certainly like to, because I think a lot of the stuff that's out in YA right now is more psychological thriller rather than more like kind of comedic mysteries. So if you do like my Clue books, the other books in YA right now that I recommend are Jennifer Lynn Barnes' Hawthorne books or Maureen Johnson's Stevie Bell books. Any tips for writing murder mysteries? I am a big fan of plotting, and I think mysteries are a plotter's paradise. But I say that, and a friend of mine, Jenna De Leon, is a very well-known mystery writer, and she always says if she knows who the killer is, then the reader will too. So who knows? I like to think of it the way Maureen Johnson does, and I listen to her on a podcast, and we both kind of think of plotting mysteries as building a spider web, and you have the murder in the center, what actually happened, and then all of these little strings lead out and connect to each other. And if you're the reader or the writer or, the sleuth or whatever, you're the spider sort of carefully traversing the springs of the web and trying not to hit the sticky parts and get caught. Two big things I learned as a new mystery writer. One is a craft thing, and one is sort of a market audience thing, but it's also a craft thing because everything comes back to craft. So the first thing is, as someone who has always been a fan of intricate plotting and structure, which you have to be if you're going to write multiple timeline books, which I did for Dark and Shows the Stars, The red herrings don't actually have to add up to anything at the end. That's what makes them red herrings. So I learned this because one of the books I went back and I added another suspect in revisions, and I thought it was just going to be hell to try to make it all work. And then I realized when I got to the end that I didn't actually have to make it work in the end because that person wasn't the killer, and it didn't matter what suspicious thing they were doing, really. It didn't actually have to have anything to do with the story. And that was a good thing for me to learn. It made it a lot easier to plot from there on out. And the number 2 thing, that there are some people, some poor souls, who they really only read the mysteries to find out who done it. So the characters, their relationships, the themes, what it's saying about the wider world, none of that matters to them. It's not a narrative, it's a puzzle. And for those readers, if they manage to figure it out before the end, the book in their mind has failed. And I think that's how you sometimes get these mystery properties, and I'm not going to name names, but they're so obscure and the solutions are so out of left field and make no sense because they're based on like a quirk of a finger in one scene or, one page out of 400. For me as the audience, those kind of things aren't even enjoyable anymore. I don't think that creators should create, especially when we're talking about a long-term book series or a TV show or something like that, with the expectation that it's going to be a surprise to every reader every time. Especially when you're talking about the internet. I think about George R.R. Martin responding to how people had guessed the big secret of Game of Thrones. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's the one that people refer to with the equation. And saying, look, I'm not changing the book series that I've been working on for a decade because some people on the internet actually, took the clues that I had sprinkled in the book and figured out the solution. When In the Hall with the Knife came out, I'd get these reviews, and one review would be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea who did it. This was fantastic. And the next review would be like, oh, so obvious who did it. Like, this sucked. And what I realized looking at these things in aggregate was that you only have a given number of characters in a story. And so someone just is going to guess right. So my job as a writer is to try to make it mysterious and make it a puzzle for the reader. But more than that, to try to create a fun experience for the reader so that they can come back to it over and over again, even if they already know who done it. I mean, I watched the Clue movie so many times I had it memorized, and it was still fun.